All right, welcome everybody to our conference this morning. We'll go ahead and ask you to get seated. We're going to have a good crowd today. It's good to see everybody's smiling faces, especially in today's world. It's exciting. We have a really good agenda planned for today, and we thank you for coming. I'm Rusty Cannon. I'm the president of the Utah Taxpayers Association. And I've been waiting to say this for a long time. This is the beginning of our 100-year celebration. This year, thank you. We're going to go into a bit of that history today and actually throughout the year, so we're quite excited about that. So I wanted to read something really quickly about our beginning. So 100 years ago, the Utah Taxpayer publication began publication dedicating itself as, quote, devoted to the interest of Utah taxpayers, unquote. In the early afternoon of October 15th, 1923, 7 businessmen met downtown in Salt Lake City to form an association of taxpayers. The first meeting of the Utah Taxpayers Association formalized a process of taxpayer advocacy that began in 1922 with the publishing of the Utah Taxpayer. The first publication devoted to acquainting citizens of this state with important tax problems, believing that collective thinking and concerted action would aid in the solution of these tax problems. Accolades for the new association rolled in almost immediately. Then Governor Charles Mabee, in a 1923 letter to the association, predicted that, quote, the association would wield an influence and power for good in this state. The Salt Lake Tribune strongly encouraged support of the newly formed association, writing that, quote, the ultimate results will be measured exactly by the extent to which all taxpayers, large and small, rally to support an organization formed in their interest. The Deseret News likewise also encouraged support for the association. So I wanted to share an example. We have in our office these bound newsletters that were first published, a lot of them the original copies. This one is from January of 1923. The postage, 1 cent. It says 1 cent paid at the top. As an example on these newsletters, talks about from the official records a pyramid showing the total taxes collected for all state purposes from 1916 to 1922. Tax revenue, that's hard to see, was 8.8 million, growing to 17 million over those about 8 years or so. At the bottom it says, how far did you, as a taxpayer, participate in authorizing this added burden, was the question asked on that newsletter. So those are the types of things that we're going to be highlighting throughout this conference and throughout this year, in the upcoming year. First of all, we wanted to thank our sponsors that made today possible. We wanted to thank our sponsors Domo, Rio Tinto, Comcast, the Utah Association of Realtors, Utah Bankers Association, Rio Tinto, AT&T, and Sinclair. Let's give them a hand. We also wanted to give a shout out to Doug Johnson Productions doing our live stream. We welcome everybody that's here on the live stream as well. We have quite a large crowd in the live stream as well as in person today, and we're excited about that. We all know the world is changing, and with all that's been going on, many states in response to COVID and their budgets and what's happened have been aggressively working on tax policy, cutting income tax rates, for example. 16 states in the previous year cut their income tax rate. Another 8 have it teed up for this year. Soon, the median tax rate across the country will be down to 5%, which is basically matching Utah's rate of 4.95%. So Utah has work to do to stay in the lead, and obviously that's something we've been advocating for. So I'm excited to introduce our first speaker today, President Stuart Adams, President of the Utah Senate, represents District 22, which is my home district in Davis County. He began his legislative service in 2010, and we're excited to hear from him. We'll welcome him to the stage, President Adams.
You know, it's really great to be here, and it's great to see another great colleague, former Senator Howard Stevenson. Congratulations on 100 years. Howard, I always thought you were the founding member, but I don't know. 100 years, I'm not sure about that, but it's great to see you, great to be with you. Remember last year, I think we were here and we made a little announcement, and we announced that 2021 was going to be the year of the tax cut. Well, guess what? 2022 is the year of the tax cut again. And I think everyone's probably aware, because you've read that we've actually put aside $160 million for a tax cut. That's pretty exciting. That's probably the minimum amount of money we'll do for a tax cut. But I just mentioned why do we want to do a tax cut? And the 16 other states talked about it, but more importantly than that, when you look at income tax versus a tax on consumption, you have a tax on productivity versus a tax on consumption. Let me just maybe give you an example of why it's important to cut the tax on consumption. If we taxed, and this is a little bit far-fetched, but if we taxed somebody's income at 100%, meaning if you made $1, you sent it in taxes, who would work? Probably not a lot of people would work. If you tax a tax on consumption, if a car were taxed at double, it would surely, when you tax something, you get less of it. It would make the car double that expensive. But if you had income, you probably still would buy cars. And so there's a great difference on taxing consumption and productivity. So here are the states, it was mentioned, that have actually reduced their income tax. You look over on the far left, Idaho, not very competitive, 6.95 to 6.5, but Colorado, 4.63, they dropped it to 4.55. You can see Louisiana on some of the others. A corporate tax cut in the middle. Arizona, Karen Fann, the Senate president there, great Senate president, very competitive with Utah, where they were at 4.5. They're now at 2.5. If we're going to maintain a competitive advantage, as has been mentioned, we need to look at our income tax, and income tax is so important to actually try to figure out. There are states that don't have any income tax. One of the challenges in Utah is that we use income tax to fund education. And we're going to continue to fund education. I don't think there's any question about our legislative commitment to fund education. It's going to continue to happen. We just have to find other ways to do it. We've done it in the past. We'll continue to do it in the future. We can cut income tax and we can fund education. So that's the goal of the legislature. So you've heard a little bit about Utah's economy. We're in a very strong financial position. We've been rated as the best economy in the nation. Forbes gave us the best GDP. We know we have the lowest unemployment rate in the nation. We've had a very strong economy, and we're going to make decisions to keep our economy very strong. A couple of concerning trends that aren't being talked about a lot, and you haven't spent a lot of time on them. I looked at the Wall Street Journal this morning. Maybe some of you get the Wall Street Journal, some of you don't. The lead story in the Wall Street Journal is this: 2021, last year, closes the highest inflation rate since 1982. Now, some of you in here weren't even born in 1982. We started our business in the late 70s, early 80s. We actually were very excited to get into business. Gas prices were 50 cents. They went to $1.50. What happened to it? And look at gas prices today. What happened to interest rates? They were at 10% then. They went to 20. It absolutely, inflation destroyed our economy. If what you're seeing happen right now in the economy doesn't bother you, then you're not paying attention. We as a state cannot let inflation keep going. We're getting way too much federal spending. It's causing prices to rise, but also we're seeing gas prices rise. We need to make sure that the oil production in eastern Utah keeps going strong and that we keep our refinery strong. We all believe in alternative energy, but we can make the transition to alternative energy without raising gas prices, causing inflation, and causing the economic calamities that will happen from inflation. That's something we need to keep our eyes on, even though it's not probably out in front with all the money we have to spend in the legislature this year. The other problem I see that we have is a workforce crisis. And again, it's stimulated a lot by a lot of federal spending that pay people to stay at home. But in addition to that, when you look at Utah's flag, right in the middle of the flag is a beehive. And we all know that where the beehive stay, but underneath that beehive talks about industry. In Utah, we believe in industry. We believe in hard work. Hard work is what's got us through all the challenges that we've faced over the period of times that we've had in Utah. But when we pay people to stay at home, and it actually not only affects the productivity, but it affects their mental health. We need to keep people back to work. And so my plea today is, if you don't have a job at a 2.1% unemployment rate, you can go find one. And if you're retired, think about coming back into the job market, because we actually need your help. So The other thing that maybe I'll talk for a minute or two on some of the priorities we have. We have a lot of money. Senator Stevenson, if he's here, he'll talk about it. He's running about a $2 billion of requests per day. We don't have that much money to spend. It's amazing when you say you have a lot of money where all the requests come from. We'll never have enough money to cover all the requests that come in. But we have to prioritize those requests. We know that the limiting factor for Utah's growth is water. We're going to have to deal with water in multiple different ways. 70% of the new water production will not come from Bear River Project for Lake Powell. We need to build the Bear River Project and the Lake Powell Project. But 70% of the new capacity will come from actually conservation. We've seen some innovative things happen. I saw Layton City actually change their ordinance, and instead of people xeriscaping their yards after the fact, they're actually encouraging people to xeriscape their yards before, maybe giving density bonuses to developers. It's a lot easier to put those xeriscaping elements in before than to actually do it after you have your grass. Infrastructure will always be an issue, fastest growing state in the nation. We're talking about double tracking Front Runner. That's a great idea, but that's not enough. I mean, when you get on Front Runner, it runs fine, but we need express trains. We not only need express trains, but we need to electrify Front Runner. And electrifying it isn't really the answer. The answer is more speed. And when you go to Europe, a slow train goes 150 miles an hour. That's a really slow train. We think we're innovative at 79 miles an hour. We need to change that. We need to be able to move people faster, more efficient in Utah, and we need to actually look beyond some of the priorities we have today and look beyond the next couple of years, because if we're going to grow, the only way we're going to handle that growth is to be able to deal with innovative infrastructure ideas. Education. I lump education right into the highest part of infrastructure. If we don't believe in our people, believe in our kids, we're going to be in trouble. We have a lot of education ideas. We need pre-K, fund Upstart. We need Senator Milner's actually focusing on third grade reading. We need to do that. But we also need to look at ways and we have very innovative apprentice programs where high school students can actually work for companies, get to high school credits. Those companies actually, if they like the student and they integrate well into their business, they pay for their college and they pay for their education. There's very innovative ways out there that we're seeing in our education system to be able to educate our kids, again, to be able to provide that workforce we need. We have some challenges in Utah, but I would just say for a moment, with all the challenges we have workforce challenge. I talked about inflation. We have other things we're dealing with COVID. We've dealt with COVID, and I think in probably one of the most responsible ways of any state, focusing not only lives, but livelihoods and our school kids. But take a moment, will you, as we look at the challenges, but also look at where we're at, having one of the best economies in the nation, having fought the pandemic, I think, in a very responsible way. Perhaps take a moment just to be happy, because I think as a state we're doing a lot of things great. Appreciate you having me. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you, President. We appreciate it. Always great to hear from you. We'll move right along to our next speaker. Speaker of the House, Brad Wilson. He represents District, I forgot to write down your district. 15, District 15 in Davis County. He has been in the legislature since 2010, elected Speaker in 2018. We always enjoy when we're up there in the session seeing the back and forth between the House and the Senate. So one right after the other. We're excited for any fireworks that might ensue. But okay, got it. Welcome, Speaker of the House, Brad Wilson.
Rusty, we get along famously, so with the Senate most of the time. So, hey, congratulations to you and your organization on 100 years of making a difference in the state of Utah. It's remarkable. And so Rusty and I live up in Davis County, and we go to the same gym. And You wouldn't know that because Rusty's tall and handsome and thin, and I'm the opposite of all of those things. But there's been occasionally I'll get on a treadmill next to him or an elliptical, and I feel 100 after I get off of that because you're like a machine, and I'm not. But anyway, and Rusty, we really appreciate your leadership in the state and the influence that you have. So. The state of Utah has been growing, as everyone knows, at just remarkably unprecedented rates. And think about this for a minute. The Kempsey Gardner Institute is telling us, all of us, that the state of Utah is estimated to add 50 to 60,000 people a year, each year, for the next 30 years. And our population is going to double in a very short period of time, in half a generation. That's going to happen quickly. So also last week, and this is probably not for public consumption yet, I won't tell you where I saw it, but I saw a survey of Utahns, a big survey of how Utahns are feeling about the state of Utah. And almost half of Utahns believe right now that this growth is making life worse for all of us. So that's kind of a startling statistic, but probably also not a big surprise. All the policy decisions that the president and myself and the other 102 of us make over the next 7 weeks really need to be made in that context and through a prism that keeps that in mind. So you've heard this before, but Utah is super successful because we do something called the Utah Way. We practice the Utah Way, which is a forward-thinking, principled, collaborative approach to solving problems and challenges as they arise. And I think for our generation of leaders, figuring out how to lead through and manage the growth that we're facing is going to be a really, really interesting challenge and something we're all going to have to really get focused on. And do it in the way that we've solved problems in the past, through a conservative, pragmatic lens that helps us figure out how to keep government in the right lane and let private individuals and the private economy do the kinds of things that it does best. So I want to share with you, I don't have slides, sorry, but some key policy areas that the House is considering, and you'll be happy to know, President, that they look a whole lot like yours. So, but let me start with water. And the President already said this, but the secret to water is that we conserve, we preserve, and optimize the water that we already have. And this includes taking big steps to ensure that we preserve and protect the Great Salt Lake. The second kind of element or theme from the House this year is what I would describe as affordable Utah. We all feel, and part of the angst in half of Utahns feeling anxious about where we're at right now, we all feel the state of Utah feeling less affordable and more expensive to live in. We need to make sure that the policies that as policymakers we put in place make that problem better, not worse. And that really needs to be a focus for us. One of the best ways for us to do that, to make sure we keep life more affordable here in Utah, is to ensure that tax policy lets people keep more of their money and spend it the way they want and the way they need to. I also want to talk about education innovation for just a second. The pandemic has been very disruptive to our education environment. And we really need to take this moment we're in and figure out how to harness the change that's possible right now in public education and higher education and innovate in ways that we've really never thought of before, including a focus on making sure that when our kids are done with third grade, that they are able to read at a much higher percentage than they are right now. And Senator Milner is actually leading that effort. And I also want to talk about just what we all love about Utah and how do we maintain what we describe as the Utah way. So preserving this quality of life that we all love about our state is really tricky in the headwinds of growth. And how do we manage sustainable growth versus rapid growth? One of the things that we can do, and you're going to see a big focus on this session, is changing the landscape of our economic development incentives and doing it in a way where we're really focused on just a few key industries that we want to make the cornerstone of our future economy and be a lot more prescriptive about how that looks. And also, when we think about maintaining the Utah way, I hope that we can build on what we did last year relative to outdoor recreation. One of, if not the thing, when we survey Utahns about what they love about Utah, more than living by our parents, we love living by outdoor recreation opportunities. Sorry, moms, but when people move out of state and then move back to Utah, the number one thing they say they want to come here for is outdoor recreation opportunities. Number two is to be my mom. So lastly, I just want to talk about big generational investments. So we have a couple really interesting things happening in the state of Utah that have been building momentum for a while that can be strategic investments for the next generation. And specifically, the Point of the Mountain and how we make key transportation investments in that area to ensure that it can fulfill its opportunity and also be an asset to the state, not a liability. And we also have learned some things about the inland port over the last few years. And we need to align the governance of the inland port with a statewide mission of managing that logistics and manufacturing opportunity for the entire state, including ensuring that we're harnessing rural Utah and the infrastructure needs of the rural parts of Utah. So we know that the path to economic success does not start with bloated state government, and I think the president and myself and other policymakers that are here are really proud, maybe it's not the right word, but we've worked really hard to ensure that we have not bloated state government. We've kept it lean and mean, and that includes we want to make sure we foster a low tax and a low regulatory environment for Utahns. But it also means that we need to make key investments in things like education and infrastructure. In terms of infrastructure, and the president alluded to this, but let me just give you an example of how I think we can use tax dollars even smarter than we have. We're proposing to use a portion of the state's one-time revenue, which is sizable this year, to pay for the double tracking of Front Runner with cash rather than bonding, which we talked about doing last year. This is going to save taxpayers in the state of Utah $30 million over the next decade and a half. Lastly, when I think about the big things that are really important for the state, I want to talk about how, while not expanding government, we are a state that is facing the same workforce challenges that the private sector is facing. Think about this for a minute. The average state worker the average state employee's salary is 13% below market. And 87% of state employees' salaries are below market as well. We are 10th out of the 11 western states for starting salaries for our highway patrol. And you know, we say we like to run government like a business, and all of us know that no business can survive without talented, dedicated, and fairly compensated employees. The cost of turnover to the taxpayer is phenomenal if we don't address this issue. So we're going to focus on that this coming session. The optimum policy for a state facing growth like ours is really tricky. We've got to find the balance between a low tax environment that fosters innovation and investment, but also we've got to have sufficient tax revenue to the state of Utah so that we can make prudent, forward-looking investments in the future generations that are depending on us today to make good decisions for them tomorrow. So I just want to, as I start to wrap up, come back to the idea of this affordable Utah. Life, as we know, is getting more expensive here in the state, and our rapid population and income growth are pretty evident as we think about that. Federal policies, which have been reckless over the last 2 years, coupled with supply chain issues, which don't seem to be getting better anytime soon, are adding inflation, significant inflation that Utah families are feeling right now. Whether you're buying a home, raising a family and buying your groceries, or even trying to settle into retirement, that dream has moved further out of reach for many people in our state. As I said before, the best way Utahns can afford the cost of living here in our state is to leave more money in their pockets. So we also know over the last decade that our rapidly growing economy has brought in more and more tax revenue. Despite growth, we collect less taxes per dollar relative to our GDP than all but 13 states in our country. And we have the 17th lowest combined tax rate of any state in America. But get this, over the last 12 months, just the last 12 months, we've seen income tax collection to the state per capita increase by $600. So most of this, let's be fair, is coming from the federal government injection of $29 billion. $29 billion the feds have printed money and injected into our economy. That's 15% of the state of Utah's GDP in 1 year that's come in from Washington. So that's a big part of where that $600 came from, and it's probably an artificial number in terms of being sustainable. And we know we don't want to make long-term commitments on spending or tax relief based on short-term stimulus programs from the federal government. However, the trend is super clear. This trend shows that there is room in our budget for some tax relief for Utahns. And I think the vast majority of the legislature is committed to continuing to chip away taxes whenever possible. Last year, we passed $100 million in tax relief, and this year, the Executive Appropriations Committee has set aside $160 million in tax relief. Rusty thinks that's a nice start, and we'll see where it ends up by the end of the session. But as you're all aware, income taxes, however, are not the only taxes we have to pay, and I just want to put something on everyone's radar screen. Property taxes are a big part of the tax landscape we pay in the state of Utah. According to the Utah Tax Commission data, thank you, John, locally assessed property tax collections on real property statewide have increased about 6% per year over the last 5 years. It's a significant amount of increase. And as we think about affordability and the increases that are hitting Utahns from every direction right now, this is an important element. And sales prices, think about this. I know a little bit about this. Sales prices on the average Utah home in the last 12 months have gone up over $100,000. So just want to put this on your radar screen. Truth in taxation generally works to keep property taxes in check across a taxing entity. But with property values skyrocketing at the rates we're seeing, there is potential, and we're seeing some hot spots for this around the state, for individual taxpayers to face a significantly unfair tax burden on them inside their taxing entity. When we have properties that are assessed during steep price hikes, people may see their relative value increase compared to their neighbors. They shouldn't, but that's happening in parts of our state. And while overall tax collections for a city or county will not go up with rising home prices because of truth in taxation, individuals whose relative increase will see a property tax hike while their neighbors see a decrease, and that's not right. We've got to work on this and make sure that all of our taxing entities are treating the property taxes being collected inside their county or city are fair, because we have some places we think it's small in number, but we have some places that it's extremely unfair right now. I look forward to working with you, Rusty, and the Taxpayers Association and the business community over the course of the next session and many years to ensure that we can ensure the Utah way of life and continue to make Utah a great place to live. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That was excellent. Always good to hear from you. Next up, we have what I would say one of the ultimate sources on tax policy in Utah. For almost half of the history of the Utah Taxpayers Association, a key employee has been at the helm there. Howard Stevenson, former Senator Howard Stevenson, and our former president. And I say this with you know, from the bottom of my heart. We respect his wealth of knowledge that he gained over more than 4 decades at the Utah Taxpayers Association. And today he is going to talk about a century of sound tax policy that the Taxpayers Association has helped form. And we're really excited to hear from him today, Howard Stevenson.
So Rusty says I need to abbreviate it. So hold on to your seats, keep your hands and feet inside the car, and hold on, because here we go. 100 years in a few minutes. Oh, there we go. We became a state in 1896. The election voted for William Jennings Bryan in that presidential election, and William McKinley won the vote by less than 1% margin nationally. In the Utah legislature, only 3 Republicans were in the House and none in the Senate. From 96 to statehood, from statehood to 1922, the economy was primary agriculture, property taxes were a primary source, and progressives were pressuring states across the nation to enact sales and income taxes. From 96 to 22, also the economy, this motivated business leaders in Western states to create taxpayers associations, and Utah was one of the first, in fact, the first in the 11 Western states. In the 1920 general election, just before the creation of the association, only 1 Republican was elected in 1916 in the Utah House, but in 1920, only 1 Democrat was elected, so it was a total flip in politics, and Republicans controlled the Utah Senate. Here's where the money goes. Rusty's already given you some of those numbers, and the accolades from Governor Mabee, the Deseret News, and the Tribune. By the way, Governor Mabee was not reelected. The historians say he was humorless. Here's the, on the left are the different industries that are represented on the General Committee, what we now call the Board of Directors, and on the right are the county chairs. And I draw your attention to Summit County, Dr. L.C. Snow. Lawrence Crosby Snow was the chair in Summit County. He was a doctor at the Park City Miners Hospital. He was my wife's grandfather, so I married well. Western States Taxpayers Association was founded in Salt Lake City in 1923, and there we encouraged all 11 states to form taxpayers associations. We actually were a part of the minutes of the California Taxpayers Association as they worked to organize in 1925. We traveled down there to help them know how to do it. Isn't it interesting, that history? The income tax and the sales tax were things that we were worried about, and unfortunately we lost that battle. Income taxes began in 1931 in the state of Utah, and sales taxes in 1933. Here are the states that still do not have an income tax, and you'll notice 3 of those are part of the 11 western states, and here are the states that don't have a sales tax. 2 of them are the western states. So at least 5 of the 11 western states were able to keep this so-called 3-legged stool from occurring. The Tax Foundation has ranked business climates in each state, and we see that Utah is 10th best business climate. All the other states except Indiana only have 2 of those taxes, and we have been encouraged to get rid of our income tax. Dr. Hiram Harris was the executive vice president around 35 to 1968. He was a PhD. His brother was Franklin Harris, the president of BYU, who later became president of Utah State University. Jack Olson then followed him, and he was a research analyst initially and then executive vice president. And as you know, I've been there since 1977. I was an analyst till 1990 when Jack Olson retired, and have been the president until 1921. April 15th of last year, I retired. So one of the big things we did was property tax limitation. When I started going around the state, back then you didn't have all this electronic communication to get budgets, I discovered that no taxing entity's budget related to, or tax rate related to their budget. They just decided, well, we think we'll leave the rate where it was last year. And we said, well, your values have gone up. You're going to have a windfall. Well, we're not raising taxes. We're leaving the rate where they are. And so we passed a law in 1978, my second year in the Taxpayers Association, to relate tax revenues budgeted to the tax rate. It's just a simple formula. Property tax limitation was next. The 1978-1980 reappraisal prompted tax revolt, and you saw the pictures of that out in the foyer. This was huge. People weren't storming the Capitol like January 6th of last year, but they went inside the Capitol while the legislature was in session and were chanting, "No more taxes." And I'll tell you, legislators heard that message. Property tax limitation was enacted in 1980 with a 6% cap on property tax increases. That cap became the floor, and so everybody was still getting awful tax increases. The legislature, unfortunately, placed on the ballot in 1982 a primary residence exemption, which devastated school districts in residential communities. It was the worst tax policy change in the history of our state because it created haves and have-nots. And it didn't really solve the revolt from taxes. And so in 1985, as people were still upset, we enacted the Truth in Taxation Law, thanks to Gary Cornea, a commissioner at that time, who helped us with that. And it required public notices. And so what happened with the taxes that, I don't know how to use the pointer, but as you can see, the lower line is the gray. That is the property tax. It is very stable because of our Truth in Taxation Law. That first trough is the recession in 2001 and 2 following 9/11. And as you notice, the sales tax didn't drop then because it included food. But when the next recession came by with the housing bubble burst, both the income tax and the sales tax were devastated, but the income tax was resilient because of Truth in Taxation. It works. In 1985, we were 24th highest. Now we are 39th and 45th when it comes to homes. One of the biggest persons to impact sound tax policy in the state of Utah is Mark Bushai. He was elected a Taxpayers Association chairman after serving as in the tax commission. Looks like I got the wrong slide deck because it doesn't include the other stuff here. But these are the people who were important in the success of the Taxpayers Association: Howard Headley, Greg Freedy, Wes Quinton, Mike German, and Royce Van Tassel and Billy Hesterman. And now we have these guys who are in charge of the Taxpayers Association doing a great job taking us into the second century. I would have to say that we ask, how did we do in our first century? I think the census, the 2020 census, really is a good indicator of that. First of all, from rich states, poor states, all legislators know this. Art Laffer has said for 14 years straight, we have the best economic outlook. That indicates how we've done in our first 100 years. But But the 2020 census also tells us how we've done, because it shows that we have the fastest population growth in the nation, we have the fastest job growth in the nation, and even better than that, we have the lowest poverty rate in the nation. I would say that Utah is the shining city on the hill that Ronald Reagan has often spoke of. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. It's great to hear that history behind the association, and you will forever be a part of that, and we truly do mean that. Our next speaker is our Tax Commission Chair, John Valentine. He has a very long bio, which is great, on the website that I was looking at yesterday. Attorney for decades, President of the Senate. I hope he's never not the Tax Commission Chair, but I know that's not possible. But the one thing I was going to note, he's an avid emergency responder. I don't know if all of you knew that. He's a lieutenant with the Utah County Sheriff's Search and Rescue Team, was an advanced emergency medical technician, and a National Association Search and Rescue instructor. So we all know who to have on speed dial when we get stuck in the canyon. We'll wake him up at 2 a.m. and he can come save us. Commissioner? Thank you.
Thank you, Rusty. I think I'd rather be regaling you with some fun search and rescue stories, because I've got a bunch. I've been doing that since the 1980s, so it's been a passion for me. Instead of playing golf, I go at 2 a.m. and go hike up a mountain someplace. Okay, let's start with a quick caveat. The things that I'm going to be talking about today are what we've seen so far in the legislature. We see some other things that are going to be coming. Some of those have confidential notes on them, so we can't talk about them publicly yet. Those legislators are still working on the proposals. Some of the things we're going to be talking about today at the end will actually have some of the litigation aspects of what's happening that I can tell you about, which are the public side of the litigation. And so look for those in the couple of minutes that we have together, because that's what we'll be looking for. So with that as a background, let's start first with legislative priorities. We've not taken positions on some of these bills. We actually have a meeting set for tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. to actually have a public meeting to take positions on some of the bills. So if I'm sounding a little bit like I haven't taken a position, it's because it requires at least 3 members of the commission to vote for a particular bill before we can take a position of opposition or support of a bill. We often will take a position that says that we're going to go neutral on a bill, and we only deal with administrative concerns because they're policy choices. They're policy choices of the legislature. I have a lot of respect for that, having spent 26 years making those policy choices, and now I say, okay, I'm no longer making those choices. I can at least now advise as to whether or not it's workable. And so that's what we will focus on many times as the Tax Commission. Okay, the first income tax bill that we're going to talk about today that's public is the bill, House Bill 105. This is Representative Siegmund's bill. It reduces the corporate franchise tax rate to 4.75%. This has the effect on the average household of about $198 per year in savings. Has a fiscal impact of reducing individual income tax returns by $290.3 million and corporate income tax by about $30 million. So that's quite a bit in excess of what is the amount that has been set aside by executive appropriation for the tax cut. So again, $30 million corporate, $290 million individuals. That's the total impact of this particular bill. The next one is Senator Vickers' bill, and that's Senate Bill 59. Senate Bill 59 has a more modest reduction. It reduces the rate to 4.9%. This is about $46 per individual on the average, and has a fiscal note on individuals of about $23 million and corporations about $800,000. And so the total on this one is about $25 million. Obviously, it's significantly below the $160 million that's been set aside by the legislature for tax cuts. The third bill is Senator McKay's bill. And this is a much more aggressive bill, and this is Senate Bill 62. And this one reduces the income tax rate of about 600 million, actually $637 million per year going on forward for individuals, and about another, $47 million for corporations. And so this is significantly above the amount set aside. This one's about $680 million ongoing reductions in the corporate income tax. As an aside, we will be talking about later when the Lieutenant Governor talks to us about what's the governor's proposal dealing with the grocery tax credit. That one has been scored to be about $160 million, exactly where the set-aside is. So I'll let her present that. I can say this, the Tax Commission is fully supportive of the governor's position on this. We can administer that one, and we'll probably take a position tomorrow on that particular bill. But that was one that we've been working on for quite some time, and we worked on it in 2019, worked out a lot of the administrative concerns we had in this particular proposal that the governor will be presenting today. The next one we'd like to talk about is the Social Security tax amendments. This is Representative Brooks's bill. This expands the eligibility for Social Security benefits. It gives a 25-cent reduction. On the 25-cent reduction on the threshold, it increases it from $25,000 to $31,000 for a single, and $30,000 to $37,000. The net effect is that it's about a $15 million revenue reduction and relief to taxpayers who are on Social Security. It basically increases the thresholds for the phase-outs. The next one is Senator Maine's bill on Social Security, and it does the same thing, but it does it at a little bit higher threshold, and so it has a little bit higher impact. It's about $317 per year and has a fiscal impact of about $25 million. The next one is creates an exemption from income tax if a non-resident individual works in the state for 20 or fewer days during a taxable year. Now, this has become a real problem for Utah, as it's become for every other state. And that is, as we saw changes in the workforce with remote work, we now see different kinds of rules as to what state is going to tax the income. Let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you are working for a tech company in Texas, and after the pandemic, you relocate to Utah to work remotely for your company in Texas. How long do you have to work in Utah before you are become a Utah domicile and have to be subject to Utah income tax? That's what this bill addresses. It basically adopts the MTC approach, which has been offered as model legislation. However, only 2 other states have adopted the MTC approach at this point, so we'd only be the 3rd state to adopt this particular approach to how to deal with it. We are still having no changes, however, into the requirement of when a company has to start withholding for an employee that's in the other state. And so that would still be the 30-day requirement that's in our present law under this bill. The next bill updates the language that the State Tax Commission has to print on documents related to individual income tax returns. Specifically, the phrase, all state income tax dollars fund education is being changed to all state income tax dollars support education, children, and individuals with disabilities. Basically, we've taken the constitutional provisions. The next one is a property tax amendment, and we will see probably a number of property tax amendments during this next legislative session. These are the ones, however, that we actually have bills filed and have been debated in the Interim Revenue and Tax Committee. This bill defines public utility and telecom services. This one has not yet been debated in a full sense. It has had multiple discussions in the interim committee and has provided a significant background. So that you all know, we have been working with the industry for probably 3 years trying to solve this problem of how do we tax telecoms. The problem is this. We have 2 telecoms industries that are competing against each other and are taxed differently and actually have a different tax burden. We're trying to solve that problem. We're trying to solve that problem by saying we're going to have it all be taxed locally, where the Tax Commission will then provide support on the equipment portion of it by providing schedules and providing the support for the auditing of those schedules. but that the locals would be taxing the real property component. It's anticipated that this bill could continue to have significant dialogue and discussion. We've had numerous discussions with the counties who are affected. We've had numerous discussions with the Tax Commission and with industry. This particular bill is, if we can get this passed this session, will be a landmark because it will result in a significant reduction in litigation in this area. Because of that disparity between two competing industries, it is really difficult. The next bill is Senator Fillmore's bill, and he's on the agenda to discuss this bill, so I'm not going to discuss this very long in interest of time because I've only got 5 more minutes. But this bill creates a restricted account for deferrals of income, for deferrals of property tax. This is something that we have been looking at for quite some time to try to figure out a way to make it so it doesn't bust the budgets of the counties, nor does it provide a windfall to the counties, but at the same token, it provides relief for those who are probably the most difficult, have a hard time trying to stay in their houses and paying their property tax. Senator Fillmore will make a full and complete explanation of this one. The next one is a bill that provides for a government entity such as a local agency acting on behalf of a political subdivision may not collect a delinquent property tax from the debtor's overpayment of their income tax refund. This one is one that has been a problem where a lot of the locals have been saying we need to be able to offset against it. We don't know what the policy is. The legislature needs to speak on it. This will speak on it. Senate Bill 61, if it passes, it will say that we will not be able to offset delinquent property taxes with refunds for income taxes. Now, with that, I'm going to go to questions, and I'm going to start off with the questions because I keep getting asked these 2 questions about litigation, okay? There are 2 cases that are public cases that are pending in the Utah Supreme Court. I can only tell you about them without telling you about positions because they are still pending. The first one is the challenge to the airliner price guide, which has just been filed in the Utah Supreme Court. We had a case where an airline came before us, challenged the value that they had. The counties also came before us, challenged the value they had. There was 2 issues in the case. One of the issues dealt with the privilege tax. That part has been resolved, and no one has appealed on it. The second component of it dealt with the use of the airliner price guide. That component is being appealed. It's being appealed to the Utah Supreme Court. We're actually looking for guidance to determine whether or not we're properly interpreting the airliner price guide legislation, and secondly, as to whether or not it is constitutional. So those issues are before the court. I can't really speak too much more about it other than that, but to let you know to watch for those cases coming out of the Utah Supreme Court. The second one deals with our domicile case. As many of you know, we've been struggling with the domicile case that have come to the Utah Tax Commission after the changes that were made in the legislation dealing with domicile. Those domicile cases have been difficult because they seem to run contrary to what people think should be domicile. The legislature drew some very bright lines. They said, for example, if you vote in Utah, you're domiciled in Utah, you're subject to your income tax. If you get the primary residential exemption on your primary residence in Utah, then you're domiciled in Utah. If your children go to our public schools or you get in-state tuition at our universities, you're domiciled. Bright lines. However, the challenges have come to that bright lines because sometimes people have inadvertently gotten the primary residential exemption, or were registered to vote and were registered to vote in another state as well. And so with those bright lines, they created some places where there may have been some unfairness. Those cases have now been consolidated in one appeal that's before the Utah Supreme Court. So that you understand procedurally where that's at, we have waived oral argument. The taxpayers have waived oral argument. They're now been fully briefed, oral arguments have been waived, and they're before the court now for decision. We can't really comment too much more than that on those cases because those cases are in the Utah Supreme Court. And with that, my time's up. You got one question in the back. Do I have time for one question? Let's go. One question. You got 30 seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner. Appreciate the presentation this morning. But I want to go back to the property tax deferral. We as county commissioners have seen it come out several times, and we worry about that, of the unintended consequences that has on our budgets, of consistency.
Can I repeat that question for
Yeah,
those
'cause I'm not-
online?
I'm not really
Yeah,
understanding
so,
what he's saying.
the question is on Senator Fillmore's Senate Bill 52, if I have the number right this year. I get it
Yes,
mixed up.
that's what he's gonna
On
talk
property
about in a
tax deferral, has the language changed versus last year? If you want to talk about that, I can also speak to that as well.
I think I'm going to let Senator Fillmore answer that out of deference to him, because
Sure.
he's got to defend what he's doing
Correct.
on this one. We've not taken a position on it yet, okay?
Correct, yeah.
So I think I'd like to defer and have him respond to his own bill.
Absolutely, and I can answer as well. The language is different, and he will explain that if you're here for his presentation. It'll be after the break, yeah. So, because we addressed that exact concern in one of the new iterations. So, any other questions? We do have another minute or two if anybody's got one, or we can let him get back to search and rescue.
Okay. I'm actually going to stay and listen to some of the other presentations today. I always love being here, Rusty. As I've said before, this is like coming home for me. You know, after spending nearly 40 years suing the tax commission and then becoming the tax commission, this is coming home. So
That's a
thank you
good
so
way
much.
to. That's an interesting way to put it. Thank you. Let's give him a hand. Yes, thank you. So our next speaker, Senator Mckay, is delayed in some traffic. So we had a break scheduled just after him. So we're going to take the break now. So we're going to ask that we keep this break to 15 minutes. So we'll reconvene at 10:15, and we don't want to lose any momentum. So we'll try to let you know when 10:15 comes and get everybody back in the room to reconvene. So we'll take that 15-minute break now. And there's lots of food out there. Also, we have a display table with our historical materials. We'd love for you to take a look at those. It's pretty cool to look at.
from Japan on your own when you landed. I don't know how it happened. You got me spinning round for you to tell you the truth. So you can say I didn't warn you. I'm bad, but I'm good. I'll be so good to you. Hey, yeah, oh, I'm on a roll. Hey, yeah, stay and see
Okay, everybody, we're going to get started again. We'll go ahead and ask you to take your seats and get settled. We appreciate the flexibility. But we'll go ahead and get everybody in from the foyer as well. We're excited to hear from our next speaker. As I was looking at his bio, I was trying to figure out what Jonathan Ball's title was, and I thought, well, he's got to be the president or the director or the vice president or something, but he is the legislative fiscal analyst, right? So I thought there would be a lot of legislative fiscal analysts, but according to the website, if I read it right, you are the legislative fiscal analyst. So we rely heavily on he and his department, and they do so much for us and for the legislature. Well, they work for the legislature, they don't work for us, but they are so helpful to us, so helpful to taxpayers and to tax advocates, to legislators. They do so much. He's going to be doing a very interesting presentation. We call it Budget 101 to help us understand how the budget works in Utah. We think very few people truly understand the nuts and bolts of it, and so this education will be really good. I'm going to ask that every time he uses the word counterfactual or something of that nature, he has to buy all of us lunch. And so you got to use terms we cannot, because when I heard counterfactual in a recent hearing, I thought, wow, I need to look that one up. So here to explain what counterfactual actual means, Jonathan Ball. Thank you.
Thank you. Being the legislative fiscal analyst is kind of like being the tallest building in Tooele. So apologies to representatives from Tooele. Sorry, I'll take this off. The mask is really, I'm not really worried about getting Omicron. I'm more worried that if I get Omicron on like the 17th of January, they'll realize they don't need me at the legislature because I'll be gone for 5 days. So a different kind of self-preservation. Rusty asked me to talk to you a little bit today about the budget, and you guys already know that we have a $25.6 billion budget, and you know that $9.7 billion of that's coming from the General and Education Fund, and you know that the general fund comes from sales taxes and sin taxes and extraction taxes, and you know that the education fund comes from personal income taxes and corporate income taxes, and you know that our $650 million worth of transportation fund comes from gas taxes. So I'm not going to talk about that stuff. I'm going to talk about instead the process of how we make the budget and maybe demystify that a little bit. One thing you might not know is that three-legged stool thing, we don't actually charge a property tax at the state level, right? So the three-legged stool is actually a little bit of a myth, but we do require local school districts to impose their own property tax if they want to get income tax from the state. So one little thing you might not know about the budget itself. So here's what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the structure of our appropriations process. I'm going to talk about the budget process itself. I'm going to go over some definitions. Counterfactual means opposite of the facts. There you go, Rusty. But that's not on my definition list, sorry. I'm going to show you some resources if you're interested in, especially in tax changes, where you can go and get information about our revenue estimates and about the status of collections, and then just give you some quick conclusions about how you might interact with the budget process. So this is our budget structure, our appropriation structure. Utah is unique in that every member of the legislature serves on an appropriations committee. And in fact, you often hear about the 7 appropriations subcommittees, and people think that's those are subcommittees of the Executive Appropriations Committee. That is not the case. Utah has something called the Joint Appropriations Committee, and the Joint Appropriations Committee is the House and the Senate combined. So the entire House and the entire Senate combined is the Joint Appropriations Committee. And then we have these 7 appropriations subcommittees that are based on issue area, and every legislator is on at least one of those appropriations subcommittees. Senators serve on 2 of the appropriations subcommittees. And then you have the Executive Appropriations Committee, which is kind of like a traffic cop for the appropriations process. The role of the Executive Appropriations Committee is to take input from all those subcommittees and try to balance all of their priorities against revenue estimates. The major difference between executive appropriations and the subcommittees is executive appropriations has a revenue target that they have to hit. The appropriations subcommittees don't have such a target. They can put whatever they want to on their priorities list. So that's the big difference between those two. So let's talk about process a little bit. You can start this circle anywhere you want to start it. It is a cycle. It's a continuous cycle. At any one point in time, we're working on 2 budgets, one for the current fiscal year and one for the next fiscal year. So I'm going to start at the latest point in the cycle. So up at the top, in the top left corner, EAC instructions. By legislative rule, every December, I mentioned EAC is this traffic cop, and they have to hit the revenue estimate. Every December, EAC says to subcommittees, hey guys, here's your base budget allocation. Here are some things we want to add to your subcommittee or subtract from your subcommittee. Here's the revenue estimate we have to hit. So that's probably the most important day for you guys in this room, is that December EAC date. Why is that the most important day in the cycle for you guys? Because of HJR 11, which I know, Rusty, you worked on with Representative Moss last general session. In that December meeting, starting this year, EAC is required to make a set-aside for tax reductions, or at least consider a set-aside. They don't have to make it. They have to consider making a set-aside for tax reductions. Just go back quickly to this. Where are tax bills heard on this, on the bill, in the appropriation cycle, in these subcommittees? They're not, right? They're not part of the budget process. They're heard in the Rev and Tax Committee. And so they don't get prioritized with the spending side in the appropriation process. And so that's why this date up here at the top is most important for tax policy. That's where at least you get the initial foray into paying for a tax reduction. All right, so how does this go on? The rest, some of these are not that important to you. Day 10 of the general session, legislators have to pass the base budget bills. Base budget bills are equal to last year's ongoing appropriations. So we start with the legislature's last decisions. The governor's budget's important in that it politically influences the budget. The State Board of Education's budget's important. The court's budget's important. But we don't start with any of those. We start with the legislature's last actions. That's day 10. And then for the first 3 to 4 weeks of general session, you have subcommittees meeting, right? And subcommittees are going through requests that we make recommendations from staff on. No, we don't get a lot of airplay on this, but we make recommendations on budget reductions as staff members. And in fact, we're making reductions equal to 2.8% of the budget this year. Agencies will come and ask for increases in the budget. Subcommittees will consider all of that stuff in the first 3 to 4 weeks of general session. They'll make their priorities list. And then these next two are sort of important. I'm not really sure where the... Oh, laser, okay. The legislative leadership budget building and caucus consensus, this is kind of the silent part of budget making, and I think that's something that people often overlook because it's not explicit in the rules. So after subcommittees finish making their priorities list, around the middle of February, 15th of February, we're going to update our revenue estimates. And then when we give leadership updated revenue estimates, they're going to deliberate about how they get all of those subcommittee priorities into one budget package that hits the revenue estimates, including tax reductions. And this takes a lot of back and forth, right? Because there are a lot of priorities. And Chairman Valentine, I'm looking at you, used to do this, like you know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of negotiation, and it's very tense at times and very fragile negotiation to get a budget package that everybody, well, at least enough people can vote on to get it to pass. And so, yeah, they do. Sometimes they dump water on their heads. They all kinds of things happen. That is something that I don't know most people think about. But if you're thinking about where to fit in revenue reductions, that's a time frame where you guys want to weigh in, right? You want to be talking to leadership and making sure that they're considering the revenue side, revenue reduction side in this budget balancing package. They then have to take that to caucuses, right? Because they can't do it on their own. There's 20 members of leadership in the House and Senate, and they can't, oh, hey, see, you got to count on the engineer to have a pen with a pointer on it. So right here, this consensus budgeting, caucus consensus budgeting, this is when leadership is going to their caucuses and saying, hey, this is what we agreed to the Senate, we agreed to with the Senate. Can you live with it? What can't you live with? And then they have to take that back. I mean, if that's the House or the Senate would say the same thing of the House. They have to take that back to leadership teams, rejigger, do more what ifs, come back with another budget proposal that balances to revenue, get enough votes in the caucuses for the thing to pass, right? Because what I said earlier, the Joint Appropriations Committee is the entire House and Senate combined. You got to get enough votes in the entire House and Senate combined to pass the budget. So these two areas, I think those are important times for you to think about. And this is probably why those are important. This rule says that before day 43, caucuses have to prioritize all of the bills that have fiscal impact, right? That's tax reductions. Those bills heard in revenue and tax have a fiscal impact. They have to be paid for in the budgeting process. So by day 43, the caucuses are going to decide, hey, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? So another important date for you all to consider. That's up here. Sorry, I skipped over this one. So we have the base budget bill, day 10. Supplemental bills, those are additions and subtractions to the base budget. Most of the big things get done in those supplemental bills there on day 41. Then you've got this fiscal note prioritization on day 43 that I just talked about. Then, of course, the bill of bills is on day 45, right? The bill of bills, appropriations adjustments is the formal title. It's called the bill of bills because it pays for all of the fiscal impacts of other bills that pass during general session. So that's and then Lyle Hilliard's famous quote, why do we wait until the last minute to do the bill of bills? Because we can't wait any longer. This is the definitional part, Rusty, to answer the mail on definitions. Some of this gets confused sometimes in the press, and they take a bunch of numbers and add them together and say, we have $3 billion. That's sort of true, not really true because it's spread over multiple years. So I want to talk about one-time sources versus ongoing sources. One-time sources, you'll hear a bunch about non-lapsing balances. A non-lapsing balance means budget authority the legislature granted to a state agency that the agency didn't use in the current fiscal year. The legislature has agreed to let them carry forward to the next fiscal year. Okay, so they can spend it next year if they didn't spend it this year. That's a non-lapsing balance. A lapsing balance is the opposite. So we allocated so much for an agency, they didn't spend it, we're taking it back. Revenue surplus. This is the only true surplus, these two right here, okay? You'll hear that $3 billion surplus number. That's not a surplus. The surplus is $620 million or $614 million. The surplus is how additional revenue that we collected. Revenue surplus is additional revenue that we collected above our latest revenue estimates. So we thought we were going to get this much in revenue. We got this plus N. That's N. Budget surplus, then, you take this revenue surplus and you add together the lapsing balances. That's how you come up with a budget surplus, right? This is one-time money because we collected it in the past. It's a balance in our checking account or savings account. And you're not going to reduce your income based on a balance in your savings or checking account, right? So you gotta be careful about these one-time sources. The other big one-time source of revenue is a current year reestimate. So right now, we look at what we estimated for the current fiscal year, what we did last year. We say, hey, we probably have another, $500 to $600 million that we are going to collect that we didn't think we were going to collect. And so we increase that estimate, but because it's current year, it's also one time. All right, this is the thing you really want to focus on if you're talking about taxes. You want to focus on these ongoing sources. So new year revenue estimates, this is a forecast for what's going to happen starting on July 1st of 2022. All right, so we're looking ahead on these. And because we're looking ahead, most of these are going to be ongoing. So that's to projected sales income and other general tax revenue for a future year. Base budgets I just talked about, that's last year's ongoing appropriation, anything that's not designated as one-time in an appropriations bill. And then that's the big thing really people want to focus on, available ongoing revenue. You take those new year revenue estimates, you subtract the ongoing base budgets, that gives you the available ongoing revenue for whether that's future spending obligations or tax reduction obligations. And then there's one little other change we do is called above trend revenue. The speaker talked a little bit about this. In years like this year where we've had almost $30 billion worth of federal investment in our economy, whether that's through the PPP or through unemployment insurance or tax stimulus payments or through the CARES Act or through ARPA. That's $30 billion worth of federal investment. That's not going to happen again, right? So $30 billion is equal to about 15% of our annual GDP in Utah. Our GDP grows by about 4 to 5% every year. So that's either, if you do it all in 1 year, that quadrupled GDP in that 1 year. It doesn't happen in 1 year. It's going to happen over 3 to 4 years. But it's basically double GDP growth over that period. And that's not going to happen again after 2024. So we got to be careful about this above trend revenue and make sure we're taking that out of the ongoing so that we're not making obligations we can't keep. So that's this thing minus this thing is really what you want to be looking at when you're talking about revenue changes like tax cuts. How am I doing on time, Rusty? Okay. Some resources that you might use to track this stuff. We have this website sort of blog thing called budget.utah.gov. Almost every month, except for July through October, we publish an update on revenue estimates on the collections and how collections are faring compared to our revenue estimates. That's an important resource so that you can know, hey, are we going to be above water or below water when we get to the end of the year on revenue? How much above water will we be? Does that facilitate a tax reduction? You can see a couple of those down here. They look like this. So this is our revenue snapshot. The Tax Commission does their TC23. They do a great job with that. We take that TC23 and we translate it for you. We work with GOPB to do that. We show you what was our projected percent growth rate, what's the actual percent growth rate. We show you, are we within the range, what is the range and are we within the range? But then we also do it down below, we explain it in text in case you're not a tables person, you can read it in the summary text below. Another really good resource for you is at the bottom of that budget.utah.gov page. We have all of our revenue projections going back probably 20 years worth of revenue projections listed at this site. So you can go down here to revenue reports, click that button. You see a history of all the revenue reports that we've done in EAC, including those snapshots that I just showed you, but also you can see the revenue estimates themselves. You can see our calculations on available ongoing revenue, right? The thing you want to focus on for budget reductions. And that's a really rich resource, especially if you're thinking about looking at a history of growth in revenue in Utah. Okay, conclusions. Engage in the process early, right? You want to make sure you're involved probably before December in this process, and Rusty and Taxpayers have been really good at that, and they've been engaged this whole past summer as we've been doing these updates on revenue collections. Don't neglect that leadership and caucus period, that sort of silent period of budgeting when they're trying to create a budget package that people can vote on. Focus on that available ongoing revenue, and then monitor the collections and get ready for the next time. So be ready for the next December. So that's what I have to say. I'm sticking to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was excellent. Very valuable information for all of us involved. Let's see, am I seeing Senator Fillmore in the room? There you are, right there, front and center. Thank you. So we're excited to hear from Senator Fillmore next. Appreciate his flexibility on the schedule, going a little bit different time than planned. Actually, we might be almost back on schedule. So Senator Fillmore represents District 18 here in Salt Lake County. 17, sorry. I can't read my own writing today. He's been the past chair of Revenue and Taxation in the Senate. He has been a tax advocate of the year for us. Very much appreciate his work, and he is going to be speaking to us today on providing property tax relief to seniors in need. So let's welcome to the stage Senator Lincoln Fillmore.
Good morning. I see a lot of familiar masks out there today. It's good to be with you guys, and some new masks I haven't seen before. Thank you, Rusty. It's a kind introduction. I'm really happy to be here to talk to you guys for a few minutes about that we've been working on for close to 3 years at the legislature, and we hope this is the year that we can get it done. In the three-legged stool that I'm sure people have mentioned previously today and that you guys have all heard before of our tax structure, property tax is both the best and the worst of those three legs. It's the best in that it provides the greatest stability for both taxpayers and for the government. Property is there. It grows. The taxability of property grows as population grows. Because of our truth in taxation law, it doesn't rocket up when property values are skyrocketing, nor does it rocket down in the case of a depression. And that stability can be very important for both the state and local governments, particularly for education. On the other hand, property tax is a tax on wealth and a tax on your existence. It's the closest thing I think we have in our country to a head tax, right? If you exist, you're going to either directly or indirectly pay property taxes, no matter what. And actually, as you move through your life cycle, the impact of your property tax is at its greatest impact when your ability to pay is at its lowest ebb as you age, right? You retire, most people will live on something of a fixed income based on their savings and what they might get from Social Security or a pension. So a problem that we look to solve is people who have owned property for decades or a lifetime, have raised the family there, and now they get to the point where my mortgage has been paid off for 20 years, but my property tax bill is climbing, my income is not, and so over time, I'm going to be faced with the choice of either staying in my home and leaving my home or paying my property tax. So Utah actually has a program to do this. It's called the circuit breaker. And that circuit breaker, I guess, do I have slides here? I do, but I don't know what I'm doing with it, so I'm just going to leave it alone. The circuit breaker is, it's an okay system, but it has some flaws. And after I describe circuit breaker, I'm going to talk about a proposal I think that solves the major flaws with circuit breaker. We'll do a better job of keeping seniors in their homes, and not forcing seniors to sell their property in order to pay escalating taxes during their fixed income years, and also protect all other taxpayers. Because the major problem with circuit breaker is that we are just removing property from the tax rolls, and because we're doing that, we're just shifting that tax burden to other taxpayers. And in the case of the circumstance I described, where my mortgage has been paid off for a long time, but my income is not very high and is not going up, what we're doing is we're not particularly helping that senior citizen who actually may have a net worth that is significantly enough to pay property taxes. It's just that it's held up in land and property instead of in income. What we do by granting the removal of the tax rolls is we're not subsidizing the senior citizen, but we're subsidizing the heirs to that senior's estate. Because the property will go untaxed for a period of time, and then it will be sold, and the heirs to that estate will receive a tax-free benefit that comes with the inheritance of that property. There are other problems with Circuit Breaker 2 that we could fix legislatively, but the income levels are so low that it almost does not the good that we want it to do, and it causes this harm to other taxpayers for the benefit of people who are about to inherit a fair amount of wealth. So what we're proposing to do this legislative session is to pass a property tax deferral that would be open to low-income seniors who own their property. So they may be property rich but are income poor, but allow them, instead of just escaping property tax, to defer property tax. The property tax would still belong to the estate, but would not need to be paid immediately by the senior citizen who's on a fixed or a low income. By doing that, the tax would be due with interest when the property is sold or transferred. So obviously, upon the death of the property owner, then the asset then belongs to a trust, would get distributed out according to the kinds of the trust, and the tax would be due with interest at that point. In that way, we're not subsidizing the heirs of the property, but rather the property itself continues to owe the tax, and that will be taken out with interest before it's distributed to the heirs. I think that's it's much more fair to all taxpayers. We're not just shifting the burden away, particularly if the property in question has enough value to pay its property tax. And that way, I think the property tax deferral process does the job of keeping senior citizens in their homes and not forcing them to sell in order to pay a tax bill, but it keeps all taxpayers whole, and we remove the subsidy for future generations who will just be responsible to pay that tax before they get the heir, especially because it's those heirs that really are the beneficiaries of keeping their loving parent in their home for another generation. I understand that somebody asked a question in here about what we're going to do about local county budgets, and so this bill ran last year, and this year it will have in it a $10 million restricted account that the state will set aside, $10 million of one-time funds, to be able to help local governments deal with what might happen as we adjust to the new reality. And anytime there's an adjustment to tax, there's going to be an adjustment. And that adjustment will create headaches in the short term, even though in the long term, this is a much better, more stable system that does a better job of protecting county budgets than the current system. And particularly if you think about another fix we could do for this is just expand the circuit breaker, which really does need to be expanded. The income levels to qualify for circuit breaker are like $11,000 a year, extraordinarily low. This would make those income levels a little bit higher so that it can assist more people, but by doing so in that more stable way that doesn't require an ongoing subsidy. So that $10 million be set aside in an account that counties and school districts would borrow from. And then when they receive the payback of the deferral upon the transfer of the estate, simply pay the state back. And so this one-time expense in a year when the state is flush with one-time money really is just a set-aside for future one-time receipts that will come into the state as those property taxes are paid back. And that we imagine that within about 5 or 10 years, the system will just kind of float automatically. There will be some new applicants, but some old applicants would have passed on, and their revenue will come back to the state. So after an initial dip, we'll likely see things rise as the loans are paid back, and then leveled off completely in a way that is much more fair to all taxpayers, but does help us accomplish the goal of keeping senior citizens in their homes. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to take them. Too many questions. Yes, I don't think I recognize your mask.
And Senator, I'll repeat it in the microphone for those that are online.
Fair enough.
So the question is on ranch land and how is that dealt with, maybe multiple generation types of property?
Yeah. This would only apply to residential property below the county median in value. So it would not affect large-scale ranches and farms.
I saw one other hand.
I
Was
saw
there-
two.
Or two more. Oh, there you go. Gary.
Senator, what happens in a situation where there is no sale or transfer? Either the home is held in a living trust, or I'm a joint tenant and have the survivorship of my mother, so when she dies, there's no transfer.
Yep.
I've already known it.
That's dealt with in the legislation. It has to do with the 75, because the 75 is the cutoff age here, of the 75-year-old person who is the resident and the trustee of that trust.
Any other questions for Senator Fillmore? I'm not seeing any other hands, so looks like we are good. Thank you. Let's give Senator Fillmore a hand.
Then I thank you.
All right, next up we have another distinguished senator. We have Senator Dan Mckay. We appreciate him joining us. He is the Senate Revenue and Taxation Committee Chair. He's also been quite the advocate for taxpayers over the years. And he represents District, I'm remembering the number of your district is Senate District 11, which straddles Salt Lake and Utah County, if I know correctly. So let's welcome to the stage Senator Dan Mckay.
Well, thank you for being here. I appreciate everyone staying out of the Shamu splash zone. It is a dangerous area, in a tax conference, so it's important to stay away. As Rusty mentioned, I'm Senator Dan Mckay. Next week celebrates my 10th anniversary of being in the legislature, surprisingly. It's amazing to go from being like this rabble-rouser to being the establishment. Had a town hall last night. Yeah, believe it or not, I'm not the rabble-rouser. So somebody put that in leadership's ear, would you? Because, I'm the sane, calm, Kevin's like, no, you're not. I appreciate that. So he asked me to be here to speak a little bit about taxes. And we've talked, fortunately, I'm really grateful that Jonathan Ball was here to present first. And appreciate him pinch hitting while we were out at a high school looking at the legislature and the state's policy of test to stay for the COVID-19 vaccine. As high schools reach a certain threshold, we've seen a high number of cases, and honestly, that was pretty staggering this morning. And for some reason, talking about taxes doesn't feel as meaningful as talking about the impacts of what is happening to our state and what's happening to our society. And anyway, that said, I know you want me to talk about money. I've just, thrown a last pitch just to say, maybe you have a neighbor who you haven't seen for a while and haven't talked to, haven't cared for, haven't thought much about. I just encourage everybody to reach out to a neighbor. And I think, honestly, that's probably the best thing. That's probably one of the most amazing things about Utah is we have a broad definition of who our neighbor is. And I just encourage each of us to try and reach out. I mean, the high schools are it's a complete circus in some places. So, okay, that said, I have a proposal to cut the income tax rate from its current 4.95 down to a 4.6 rate. That is around a $560 million tax cut as the fiscal note. I've been talking to several of my colleagues since the bill was released. And one of the complaints about a straight income tax is who the benefit inures to. And so I've been working with Representative Mike Winder, and he and I talked extensively yesterday about the potential of creating a credit, much like other states have created. There are 30 states now that do it. But looking at the potential of it adding some kind of earned income tax credit as a portion of the income tax cuts. And obviously, we'll work to find a balance during the legislative session. Just talking about a straight rate cut, though, doesn't do enough to really capture the whole picture. And I can, I'm trying not to look at Jonathan Ball, who's sweating every time I talk about cutting revenue to the state. So I love him. He's an expert, and he absolutely is a very sound advisor for all of us. And One of the things I look at, and I was texting him feverishly this morning, trying to look at our rainy day fund availability during the COVID-19 during the COVID-19 pandemic that we dealt with a lot of last year. We did not have to deal with or dip into our rainy day funds. And we have had surpluses since then, despite what we thought were going to be record downfalls. And I think that is a real tribute to the ingenuity of Utah. I don't know that I've ever seen industry pivot for any other purpose faster than I've seen industry pivot in any way for a pandemic. And was it easy? No. Was it flawless? No. In the wise words of Natalie Gochner, whom I'm sure she got it from somebody else, she said, nobody looks good in a pandemic. And she's not wrong. But I will say I'm really proud, candidly, of Utah and our ability to pivot to handle the trials and the difficulties that came as a result of the pandemic. I'd go even further and add that in the ingenuity of our people and our ability to pivot, we were able to find creative solutions to budget issues, to providing education, to remote working, you go down the list. Hopefully we will walk out of 2022 and we will have the COVID-19 issues in the rearview mirror, at which point we can then step back and ask ourselves, what did we learn and how are we going to do this better in the future? While we're doing that, I'm hoping that you'll have a little bit more money in your pocket as a result of an income tax cut, and I'm going to try to finish the work that my predecessor, the late, great Senator Howard Stevenson, tried to do in cutting the income. Oh, he's not dead. I apologize. He is still here. I apologize. That's a big faux pas on my part. So, and with that, I conclude my comments, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Are there any questions for Senator Mckay before we let him go? All right. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. All right. So I am excited to introduce our next speaker. Just as a preamble, so I am I always get the number of greats wrong, but I'm a great something grandson of Angus M. Cannon, who was defeated by his wife in the Senate by Martha Hughes Cannon. And I'm a direct descendant of his, and I know Lieutenant Governor has been involved with her statue and appreciate her efforts there. Deidra Henderson became Utah's 9th Lieutenant Governor on January 4th, 2021. Prior to her election as Lieutenant Governor, she served for 8 years in the Utah State Senate. As a vocal champion of the underdog, Lieutenant Governor Henderson has used her time in public office to increase opportunities for small business owners, women, families, and underserved communities by identifying and removing barriers to success. Lieutenant Governor Henderson and her husband Gabe are longtime residents of Spanish Fork. They have 5 children, 3 sons-in-law, and soon to be 2 grandchildren, the next one arriving in just 3 weeks, if that's still accurate. All right. She graduated from BYU in December of 2021 with her Bachelor of Arts in History, inspiring other non-traditional students across the state to finish their degrees. Welcome to the stage, Lieutenant Governor Deidra Henderson.
Well, good morning. It's an honor to be here. I don't remember how many of these I've spoken at. I think I spoke last year as Lieutenant Governor briefly, but for 8 years when I was in the Senate, I served on the Senate Revenue and Taxation Committee. I chaired that committee for 4 years. It's really great to see you, Howard. And for a while, when Senator Mckay was in the House, he and I co-chaired the interim committee. So he was chair of the House Revenue and Taxation Committee for a couple years while I was the chair of the Senate. So we would tag team during the interim, which was very fun. Always a party with Dan Mckay in the room. So, and I'll always remember Senator Stevenson one day, oh gosh, 6 years, I guess, into my service. I was standing in his office one day and he said, you know, it just came naturally to you. You just knew how to chair meetings when you were first elected, because I was elected and then I was thrown into this position of chair of revenue and taxation. You knew how to do it. You knew how to chair meetings. You knew the tax code. You just automatically knew all this stuff. And I laughed. I'm like, gosh, there's nothing natural about it. I didn't automatically know any of that stuff. I appreciate you saying that, but took a lot of work, I guess, to learn how to chair. And I'll never forget chairing that first meeting, committee hearing, and I felt like throwing up all day. It was, I think, the second day of the legislative session, my freshman year, and had a 4 o'clock committee and thought I was going to throw up all day long. I was so nervous. Today, I just want to talk for just a minute about a couple of the governor's priorities in the budget and about our tax proposal. But before I do that, I really do want to give a shout out. I just want to just build upon what Senator Mckay was talking about with the state. Utah is just historically known for doing really well and handling economic crises well. The pandemic is no different, and it's because of over 100 years of leadership. But I came into the legislature at the end of the Great Recession and was able to see how our state leaders, how the legislature, how our fiscal analysts, our budget directors were just so incredibly wise and had so much foresight when it came to budgeting, making sure that our budgets were sustainable and our tax cuts would be sustainable, because making sure that the revenue that we ended up bringing into the state was spent in a way that was real and not fake, so we weren't getting ourselves into the trouble and that many other states got themselves into. And boy, we benefited from that during the pandemic. So we've really weathered our storms well. One of the things in the governor's budget that we just proposed last month, there are a number of spending priorities, a number of things that we are really important to us, that we've worked really hard with many legislators, a lot of them here in this room, to make sure that we're aligning our priorities with theirs as much as possible, because we believe in that synergy. We believe in the collaborative effort to work together to solve these big problems. We're much stronger when we work together. So we are working on a number of the challenging issues of the day, such as water, conservation, planning, and transportation issues. One of the big issues that we have proposed is a food tax credit. Now, this is an issue that has been talked about for a lot of years. A lot of people have thought about ways to mitigate the difficulty that food tax can be, the burden that it can be on families. But because of the way our budget is structured, because of the constitutional earmarks for income tax revenue, that general fund money that comes from sales tax revenue is really important to our state budget. So it's a hard sell to get rid of that. It's also a very stable revenue source for the government, which is great. It's great for government because when the economy sinks, people still have to eat. They may not buy as many clothes or remodel their basements, but they still have to buy food. And so it's good for government that way, but it's also hard for people, for families, because no matter what, they still have to buy food. And so it's something that a lot of people have taken an interest in, and I feel like our tax credit proposal is kind of it's the best of both worlds. It would provide a much bigger benefit, actually, to a family than just eliminating the sales tax on food, and a bigger benefit to a family than a small income tax cut, and to average families. So here's just a few numbers. Cutting the food tax would result in a $185 benefit. So just cutting the state's portion of sales tax on food would result in a $185 benefit for a 2-parent household with 6 kids and an annual income of $100,000. While our grocery tax credit, and this would be a refundable income tax credit, would provide a $400 benefit. For a single parent with 2 children making $20,000 a year, cutting the food tax rate would give that family an extra $85 a year, while our grocery tax credit would provide $240 benefit. So, I've been a big proponent always of the sound tax principles that, taxes should generate revenue. That's what taxes are for. They're not for social engineering. They're not to make a statement. But they are to be simple. They are to be low. They are to to provide revenue for the government. But I think another fundamental principle is you can tell a lot about what a government values by what it taxes or doesn't tax. And we value, in the state, we value businesses, we value families, we value work. We've tried to keep our income tax low because we want to incentivize people to work. But we also value families. And I think that making sure, especially right now, where families are struggling with inflation, when they're struggling, I just came from a meeting with former Senate President Wayne Niederhauser, who now heads our homelessness efforts. And he was talking about the different types of homelessness, this situational or acute homelessness versus chronic homelessness, and the different ways that people find themselves in those situations. And one of the ways that people find themselves in acute homeless situations is, they're living paycheck to paycheck, and something happens. They have a health crisis. They lose a job. Something comes up, and they end up on the streets because they can't afford to stay in their homes anymore because they're just struggling so much. And I think that, especially right now, anything that we can do to make sure that families keep more of their income in their pockets, especially families with children who are struggling month to month and dealing with the inflation and all of the upheaval that's been happening for the last couple of years. I think that says a lot about us to put a value on them and do it in a way that's fiscally responsible, that protects the revenue streams to the government and protects those funding sources so that we can generate revenue to create and maintain the government services that we do have. I know that this is not a policy call necessarily that the governor is going to get to make. This is a policy call that the legislature is going to make. We're looking forward to working with them. There may be some sort of compromise. There are a lot of good ideas out there. In the end, we like all tax cuts, especially when we have so much of a surplus. Love the idea of giving money back to the people of the state. Ultimately, this is not the government's money, it's the taxpayers' money. And it's something that we value and that we treasure and that we hold as sacred. So thank you all for your service. Those of you in this room have provided incredible service to the people of the state of Utah. A lot of you are friends of mine personally, and it's always good to see you, and appreciate the honor of being here today. Thank you.
All right, many thanks to Lieutenant Governor for taking time to be with us today. That was excellent. We are now going to switch topics to transportation. So up next, we have the Director of Policy and the Legislative Services Division at UDOT, Linda Hull, who's going to be speaking to us. So I need to say Linda Hull is absolutely phenomenal. Her and Carlos Braceras there at the Utah Department of Transportation are so good to the legislature, to us, to taxpayers, in answering our questions about transportation. We feel like this is the next important conversation in taxation in Utah, and that is how to pay for roads. As electric vehicles proliferate, we could have a circumstance down the line where our gas tax revenues are severely short on taking care of our roads. This is something we've been meeting with UDOT and environmental groups over the summer half a dozen times to try to come up with a solution to this issue. So she's going to be talking to us about the status and future of Utah's Road Usage Charge Program, or RUC or RUC program, in equitably funding transportation. So welcome to the stage, Linda Hull.
Thank you for that introduction, Rusty, and the Taxpayers Association is great to work with. So we really appreciate that partnership. So, my chairman is here. So I guess I'm just pushing this little button forward as I move forward. I've got to put glasses on because I can't read without them. So the fuel tax continues to be the primary mechanism to be able to fund highways all around the country. It's still a primary funding mechanism here in the state. It funds the ongoing operations, maintenance, just the daily stuff we need to do to keep a transportation system operating. The fuel tax has been present in this country since the days of the Model T Ford. The Model T Ford. The first state to implement a gas tax was Oregon back in 1919. And so in the early days of the fuel tax, it was a great proxy for a user fee because vehicles all got, roughly the same fuel efficiency. So because they were paying taxes based on how much fuel you bought and everybody was buying about the same fuel for the miles that they drove, it was a really good proxy. But just as Rusty said, as the types of vehicles changed, as vehicles became more fuel efficient, more alternate fuel vehicles, it became less of a proxy of use. So when we look at the fuel tax as a transportation agency, we think the fuel tax has served this country very well for 100 years. It's not going to serve us for the next 100 years, and we've got to figure out what we're going to replace it with. So what this graph does is it just shows roughly the state fuel tax paid by the different types of vehicles depending on fuel efficiency. So you can see at the top the amount of money that you're going to pay just in taxes will vary dramatically from $31 a month, $6 a month to nothing if you're driving an electric vehicle. Of course, gas tax isn't the only fee that you're paying. You're also paying registration fees. But when you're looking at the fuel tax, there's a great amount of variability. And so the fuel tax no longer represents that equitable share of the cost of paying for the highway system. So the concept behind a road usage charge, it's a mileage-based system. So you're paying for the miles that you use. Similar to utilities, you're paying for what you use. And so regardless of the fuel efficiency of your vehicle, because you're paying by mile, everybody's contributing about the same amount of money to pay for the highways. Now, if you have a more fuel-efficient vehicle or an alternate fuel vehicle, there's still a very significant cost savings to you because the biggest cost when you fill up your tank is just the cost of the petroleum. It costs a lot, $3.40 a gallon roughly now. Most of that is just the cost of the fuel. So there's still an advantage for you to have that fuel-efficient vehicle. With electric vehicle, if you charge at some of these public sites that are free, you don't even have to pay for your energy. So there's a lot more equity in this, that it reflects more of a fairness principle that the legislature has been promoting, which is why the legislature has been very interested in this, because it's an equity issue, it's a fairness issue about user pays. So right now what we have with the road usage charge program, you may remember three years ago, the legislature implemented a flat fee on alternate fuel vehicles. So EVs, plug-in EVs, hybrids, that they pay a flat fee that's paid in addition to their registration fee. The intent of the flat fee is that it's a fee that's paid in lieu of the fuel tax. So it's supposed to kind of represent that proxy for paying a fuel tax. So EVs paying $120 a year, plug-in hybrids are paying $52 a year, just gas hybrids are paying $20 a year. But as part of that, if you don't want to pay the flat fee, now you have an alternative. Starting on January 1st of 2020, we started the road usage charge program. And if you're one of these vehicle owners, you have a choice. You can either pay the flat fee or you can pay a per mile fee, 1.5 cents per mile. So if you tend to drive less, if you're driving less than 8,000 miles a year in your EV or in your plug-in hybrid, you save money. You're going to pay less under a mileage fee than you would under the flat fee, and that was the incentive for people to enroll in the road usage charge program. I think what's really important and a great thing that the legislature did is they made it a choice, is you can choose. You can pay flat or you can enroll in the program. So coming out of that, we have seen, right now is the end of 2021, we have over 3,900 people enrolled in the program, which there are only 2 states in the country that have a live, ongoing, mileage-based program right now, Utah and Oregon. Our program is much bigger than Oregon. We've got more people enrolled in our program than even Oregon has. We were a little bit surprised by as much interest as we were getting from participants to enroll in this program. As you can see, it's mostly electric vehicle owners that are enrolling, but also some hybrids. Some gas hybrids are enrolling, but what we're really trying to target are the electric vehicles. So a lot of interest in the program. So this is just a screenshot of our website. You can go into our website. I put the address down below, the web address down below. You can go check it out. If you have a qualifying vehicle, we would welcome you to enroll. But I just wanted to highlight some of the things, the positives of the program, the things we're seeing positive right now, what we kind of see for the future. So the positive are, there's more interest in the program than we had anticipated that there would be. And so that's great. And we're focused very heavily on having a positive customer experience. It hasn't come with some stumbles, some rollout issues, but we're working hard with our contract manager to roll that out, because at the end of the day, we want the customers to have a very positive customer experience. As I mentioned with the contract manager, one of the concerns that people had was about privacy. So we thought one of the best ways we could put that firewall between government and person reporting mileage, we have a commercial account manager. It's a private sector person who is the interface between the program participant and us as the government entity. So the contract is signed between the participating person and the private account manager, and then the account manager will just tell us, this participant drove this many miles. We don't have information on where they drove. We just know, oh, they drove this many miles, because the relationship is between that commercial account manager and the participant. So one of the things that's an important milestone in this project, in this program, is that the fees that are generated from the mileage fee will pay the annual fixed costs for the commercial account manager. So this upcoming fiscal year, those fixed costs are going to be paid by fees. That's an important milestone for a program that's still in its infancy, that still is relatively small. So that's a positive thing. We're seeing increasing activity by other states that are exploring this and looking at it. There are 34 states now that are active members of a coalitions looking at mileage-based fees. There's the Ruck West Coalition that has 17 Western member states, of which we are a member. And then there's the Eastern Transportation Coalition that also has 17 members in their coalition, plus the District of Columbia. So I'm pretty impressed that we've got 34 states now that are actively involved at looking at these programs. And if you look at the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act bill that was just adopted by Congress, the Transportation Infrastructure Bill, Congress had continued and expanded federal support for states that are looking at these programs. We're getting support from the federal government for what we're trying to do, and they want to learn from what we're learning. So those are some of the positive things that we're seeing. When I'm looking at the future considerations, some of the things that we're looking at is just that public acceptance. We're getting more and more public acceptance. We still have to do a lot more to get wide public acceptance for the program. We need to lower the administrative costs of the system. The fuel tax is a funding juggernaut, and it doesn't cost much to collect that, because the tax collection point is from very few entities. You're only collecting it from a couple handfuls of entities. So the collection costs are extremely low. So we've got to figure out, nothing is going to be as cost efficient as the fuel tax to collect a revenue stream, but how can we bring those administrative costs down? And that's something that us and other states are really focused in on. We've got to ensure that the system is designed to accommodate technological advancements for mileage reporting in the future. And privacy that I mentioned before, privacy is still very important. We've been able to demonstrate privacy can be protected. It can be protected. So we need to make sure that the program is very strong and protecting privacy in order for people to be comfortable with the program. So as a DOT, we believe that mileage-based programs are the future, that it is the future that will provide a sustainable funding source for us as a state, for the country moving forward. And it's just going to take us some time to figure out some of the technological details to make it work on a very broad scale, but we're very encouraged about what we're finding. And I really appreciate the opportunity from Rusty and the Taxpayers Association to talk about that today. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. It's a very important topic. I was grabbing an article that I remembered I saw back in November while you were speaking about Norway. Norway now, in the last year, according to this article, 77% of their new cars sold were electric vehicles. They're now faced with a 19.2 billion Norwegian krone, which translates to 2.3 billion US dollars, hole in their budget. So that's the problem that we're trying to address now versus in the future as electric vehicles proliferate. So now, switching subjects, we're going to be excited to now hear from Representative Candice Perucci. She represents District 52 since 2019 when she was elected. She was the youngest female elected to the Utah legislature ever. So we are excited to have her come speak to us. Representative Candice Perucci.
Thanks. It's a great group to be with today. And I want to shift. I mean, we're talking about tax policy needs for a younger generation. I think tax policy conversations we need to be having with the younger generation. Growing up, my dad would come home after listening to political radio on his drive home. Always got him fired up. And 90% of our dinner discussions started off talking about a political topic. And quite frankly, we talked about taxes quite a bit. And to me, I grew up learning that what government took meant less money for my family in discretionary spending and for our family budget. And I think it's important that we talk about that. It's, as I talk to other people my age and those in the rising generation, they're not talking about politics at the dinner table. In fact, the New York Times and other major news outlets right before Thanksgiving put out tips on how to avoid talking about politics with your family, which I think is the worst thing we can do, because if there's a group that at the end of the day you can agree to disagree with, it should be the people you love, right? But I remember my first job that was beyond babysitting, when you're getting cash, you know, when I saw the money come out of my paycheck, and I had done the math in my head. I was making $7.25 an hour, and so I'd mapped it out what I was going to do with my first paycheck. And I was really irritated when it wasn't the exact amount I had thought because of the money going out in taxes. And I remember taking it home and talking with my dad, asking, what the crap, Social Security? I'm 16. Why am I paying into this? It's not going to be there when I grow up. And anyways, having those discussions. But I grew up in a home where when we talked about conservatism, it meant we believed in lower taxes for people and limited government. And so part of this discussion I want to bring up is to be having those discussions with your children, with your grandkids. If you're not teaching them, the internet is, their colleagues are, their other friends, right? Hollywood is. And so it's important that we're actually having those difficult discussions with people and educating at home. But one thing I wanted to talk about, not only in drawing importance to your kids and having them realize taxes, is a couple things I wanted to draw attention to or what are unique about millennials and Gen Zers, the upcoming generation and my generation, who is obviously biggest voting bloc if we'd actually vote, and we're in the workforce right now. So social upward mobility is huge for millennials and Gen Zers. It really resonates with this equity mindset and fairness that is so concerning. And while I was in Europe with my husband pre-pandemic, when you actually could still go, we were sitting close enough to a table. We were packed into this restaurant, and we were sitting close enough that we may as well have been sitting at the same table. So we started talking to this couple who was about our age. And when we introduced ourselves, they introduced themselves from the class structure they were in. They literally said, the woman said, well, I'm from the upper class, and my parents don't approve because he's from the lower class. And I thought, my goodness, how, to me as an American, it was so foreign, because this idea of social upward mobility, not having a class structure, is huge. And I don't think a lot of people realize how unique that is to us. And it's very American for us to believe in our ability to climb the economic ladder. And that dream is still alive and well today. It just may be shared a little differently, but it's something we have to be educating people on. But millennials and Gen Zers really do care a lot about social upward mobility, and particularly its impact on minorities and what's viewed as fair and their ability to be successful. Now, as everyone in this room probably knows, Utah is #1 for social upward mobility. And I think it's important that we acknowledge the policies that have brought us here. And again, having those actual discussions about how low taxes, a strong economy, actually lead to successful individuals, which then in turn creates a successful culture and economy. So I think it's important that we actually just state the obvious, because it actually isn't quite so obvious to people, and that we lay it out for my generation and the one upcoming. The other thing is I want to talk a little bit about capitalism. So often millennials are stereotyped as hating capitalism, and Gen Zers, and Fortune Analytics did a study. So obviously baby boomers, 73% approve of capitalism, and that's no surprise. Gen Xers are at 62%. Millennials are at 56%, and Gen Zers are, and they're the group, right, that grew up with a phone. Internet technology is how they were born. They're bringing back mom jeans, which as millennials we hate. But Gen Zers actually have a 57% approval, which is slightly higher than millennials. And so what's interesting to me, obviously there's a clear decline there, but it's still the majority. The majority of millennials still think capitalism is a positive system, and Gen Zers even slightly more. And that slight percentage is what's interesting to me, because I think we actually can turn the tide. And that's what I wanted to talk a little more about. And the reason behind that is entrepreneurship. So Gen Zers think incredibly highly of entrepreneurs. In fact, the majority of Gen Zers, so that's people born 1997 to 2007 were surveyed, the majority actually want to be entrepreneurs, overwhelmingly. And then those that once they enter the workforce, that jumps up to 65%. They want to be their own bosses, and really, really have a high opinion of entrepreneurs and what they're able to do and the flexibility that can come with it. So I don't think this should be overlooked, this love of entrepreneurship, right? Because in essence, it's the American dream, that you can build your own empire, that you can make a difference in your own way. If you haven't read Kristen Soltis Anderson, she's a pollster, and she wrote The Selfie Vote, Where Millennials Are Leading America. It's really good, but she said this: America's workforce is undergoing a transformation. Today's young people will start different businesses and build different careers from those of their parents' generation. They prioritize things like personal fulfillment and flexibility in the workplace, and they aren't joining unions. And when you discuss retirement with Gen Zers, the majority of young people would much rather that they're in charge of their own retirement. They don't trust that government will take care of them when they're older. And interestingly, the majority of them don't think it's actually the government's job to do so. So before we I feel like a lot of times when we talk about the rising generation, and I get it as millennial and then Gen Zers, we talk about them as a lost cause, but they're actually quite unique, and they're innovative, and they're entrepreneurs. And the Census Bureau actually reported that during COVID, so in 2021, there were 3.4 million new business applications, and this has been part of the rise of the side hustle, and social media has brought with it virtual shops and marketplaces and the ability for anyone to be an entrepreneur for very low costs. And Harvard Business actually reported that teenagers today are more innovative and entrepreneurial than any other previous generation, and that during the pandemic, there has been a massive increase in teenage startups. So I'm hoping this is making you feel hopeful, because it makes me feel hopeful, because entrepreneurism is a pillar of the American dream, and it plays a critical role in social upward mobility, and it's a huge indicator of an innovative workforce. So at the end of the day, what we have to be able to spell out for people is that good tax policy encourages an entrepreneur-friendly environment. And as Utah continues to grow and expand, and more Gen Zers step into the field of working and voting, paying taxes, right? I think actually taxes and having your first job is a huge way to bring someone over to the conservative side when they see their money being taken away. And as they're building a life for themselves, it's important that we're connecting those dots. And so, and I think there are three things we have to point out. First is that entrepreneurism is empowering. The ability to start your own virtual shop is pretty unique and pretty awesome, quite frankly. I appreciate it. And that entrepreneurship thrives in a capitalistic society. And we have to be able to spell that out for people. And the third is that entrepreneurs do really well when taxes are low and policies foster a small business friendly environment. So as a policymaker, as I was reviewing this information, there are a few takeaways that I think we need to be mindful of. And the first is obvious, that we develop policies that promote and encourage entrepreneurship in the state, that we're reducing burdensome regulations and are promoting a business-friendly environment that also promotes innovation in a place where Uber can thrive and Lyft and so many different options that are popping up. Who would have thought that you can use an app to order a warm chocolate cookie at 11 p.m. whenever you wanted to, right? Crumble cookie. That was a millennial that they decided, hey, we need warm chocolate chip cookies on demand. And now they've built a multi-million-dollar company. And we need to do a better job at articulating the benefits of conservative principles in the policymaking process. So often we get caught up in speaking in the rigid way we did from the 80s and 90s, but really we need to be conveying the message that if you like entrepreneurship, if you like the freedom to start your own business, then you like good tax policy. You like low taxes, and you like a conservative government, a limited government that's going to stay out of your business. So I really do think that our conservative movement is at a balance right now, and we're unnecessarily losing Gen Zers and millennials to the left, and it's time for us to be able to demonstrate that the principles of conservatism, low taxes, and limited government are really the best ways to empower all individuals and uplift our communities. So I hope you leave today with the assignment to make a point to talk to your kids, talk to your grandkids about this. It's actually important, and if they're not hearing it from you, I promise they're not hearing it elsewhere. And it's our job that we're able to convey that message and help find those entrepreneurs out there and help them see a future for themselves in the conservative mindset of low taxes and limited government. So, thanks.
Thank you, Representative Perucci. That was excellent. So our last speaker today, we're excited to hear, coming to visit us from Cache Valley, Representative Casey Snyder. Where did he go? I saw him in the room. There he is. So I highly recommend, if you ever want to make a visit up to Cache Valley, we found out recently in visiting with Representative Snyder, there's an excellent diner in Paradise with some really good burgers that we found there in Paradise. So I highly recommend going and visit him. Representative Snyder is the new House Revenue and Taxation Committee Chair, and we're excited to hear from him to talk about his perspective, so welcome him. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. Thanks, Rusty, for the shout out to what was formerly the Cracker Barrel, which is now Stillwater Cafe. If you come Monday through Wednesday, they are not open, just as a heads up. So it's got to be a Thursday, Friday, Saturday thing. The grill closes early, they want to go home. So anyway, thank you for that. I am the last thing standing between you and freedom, and I'm fully cognizant of that. So I will try and be brief in my remarks. But to sort of set the stage for this, a lot of you don't know me, and in some regards, I don't know you. And so what I kind of wanted to start out with was a discussion about who I am and kind of where I came from, and then we'll kind of delve into where I see the world going. So again, my name is Casey Snyder. I represent House District 5, which is everything south of Logan in Cache County. I've been in about 3 years. And prior to making a poor life decision and being in the legislature, I made a worse decision and worked in D.C. So I began my career in public service working for Senator Bob Bennett. And then Senator Mike Lee came in and helped us all find new jobs post-election. And I moved over and worked for Congressman Rob Bishop, where I ended my career with him as his legislative director. And before I was in D.C., I grew up milking cows. I put myself through college milking cows before school and sort of achieved full status, as all of us dairy kids do. I married the county dairy princess, and we have a couple of kids in Cache County and our own farm. But in all of my doings and all of my growing up, I will be honest, to be having me be the last speaker in an event hosted by you folks was the last thing I ever thought would happen in my life. I've generally been in the ag and natural resource space, but I think like all of us, I'm impacted and daily by tax policy. Every time I go to the grocery store, pump gas, do whatever, and so I'm very cognizant of that. I will tell you that in my house, I feel like I am frugal and my wife is cheap. It is said of her great-grandfather, they used to say in passing, that the man had 5 cents out of the first dollar he ever made. And if he caught you saying that in public, he'd then get offended and say, no, it's actually 15 cents. You've got it wrong. And that's sort of the background that I come from. It's a frugal living. I grew up in agriculture where you make do, fix it, or do without. And that's sort of the notion that I intend hopefully to engage with all of you as we move forward. I will say I've had, it's an honor to be here. I have listened through my career sort of in awe as certain names are whispered in the hallways, you know, John Valentine, right? Like, and Howard Stevenson, like, who are these people? And now to be in a conversation with you is a true honor. In talking about what I think the future of tax policy is going to be in this state, I kind of want to set the stage by, again, kind of going to my background. For most of the time here, except for my first year, I was able to live with my grandmother during the session. Thank you, Little America, for having us here. I hate being here during the session. I don't sleep. There's too many noises. It's not like home. And so for part of the time, I actually was able to go and spend some time with my grandmother. My grandmother lived in Layton, so after the session, I'd go and she had been a widow since I was a little kid, and it was just me and her, and we got to talking a lot of things. And you know, Grandma she died here this spring, so I'll probably be stuck down here again. But she was no one of note. She was, I think, what the majority of the people we represent is, and it is someone who goes about their life, finds joy in the simple pleasures, and hope that government will give them enough space to be successful. In fact, the only notable thing about my grandmother in terms of prominence is that her family did yard work for the Hogle family in the Great Depression, and that's how they survived, is by mowing the lawn and trimming the shrubs of the Hogles. And Grandma was, in her life, known for sort of this notion of being very deliberate in her spending. So my father is one of three, and it's apocryphal, but I'm pretty sure it's true, that when the kids went on vacation as a family, prior to leaving, Grandma would pull the drapes off the wall, re-stitch those drapes into matching shirts for all three children, and that's how you knew who was who at Disneyland. So the kids in the funny 70 pastels things that used to block the windows, that was my family. But that was what Grandma would do. She would repurpose something that had been used for one purpose and apply it in another way. At mealtime, Grandma would, if Grandma did not finish a full plate of food, so let's say if there was more than 3 bites of anything left on her plate, she would scrape it off and put it in a sandwich bag, and it would go in the freezer. And she would find it out. None of us were brave enough to ever repurpose that, but Grandma would come back to that at some point. And it was this ongoing debate with Grandma. Like, the joke was, don't eat anything in Grandma's fridge without checking the date, because the average was 5 years expired of anything. And things like mayonnaise go rancid fast. But Grandma held on to things, and if she could make it work, she did. And I tell you all of this because the year before Grandma died, so this was it would have been in 2020, she sat down all of her grandkids, and Grandma made a sizable financial contribution to every single one of her grandkids. She said, I don't want to do this when I'm dead, you won't appreciate it. But she liquefied some of her assets, and she gave it to each one of us instead of her own children. And then when she finally passed here this spring, she left behind significant assets and an estate to her children that will allow them to do things that she never did. And I think fundamentally that is what tax policy in this state has to be about. It has to be about restraint. It has to be about a willingness to look down the road and provide what we can to future generations and be cognizant of the fact that the money that we appropriate is not our own. It is that of widows. It is that of regular people. So we're going to have discussions, I suspect, in this session that are going to center around a host of ideas. I suspect we're going to have talk of income tax and a reduction in the rate. There's going to be conversations about how we ensure that we do not take too much from those who have to feed themselves and are at lower income brackets. And we're going to go the gamut of these issues. Folks, I don't know any card tricks. There are some of you in this room, and you know who you are, this isn't an insult, who have been practicing tax policy longer than I've been alive. And for me to stand up here and tell you this is the direction of a state would be disingenuous and unfair to your experience. But what I will tell you, and what I see coming down the pipe, at least through hopefully in engaging with my colleagues, is a commitment to fairness, a commitment to equity, and a commitment to transparency, both in what we bring in and how we ultimately, I hope, return it to the taxpayers who earned it. So I look forward to working with you this session. Again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Representative Snyder. That was excellent. A great way for us to end the conference. Again, we want to thank everybody. We've been on schedule. In fact, we're ahead of schedule, and everybody gets to go to lunch early, which I'm sure everybody's excited about. Just a couple of notes. As we mentioned, this is our 100-year anniversary, and we are very excited to be doing as much as we can to celebrate it. Please watch for additional press releases, information, some podcasts that we'll be doing with interviews from people that have shaped tax policy through the last 100 years. And we pledge to you as the Taxpayers Association for the people of Utah to do our part in making the next 100 years as good as the past 100 years. We're excited about what the upcoming year brings, despite all this going on in the year, in the previous couple of years, and we're very excited about it. Do want to also make one more shout out and thank you to our sponsors today, the Utah Association of Realtors, Comcast, Rio Tinto, the Utah Bankers Association, Domo, AT&T, and Sinclair Corporation. Thank you again, everybody, for attending. We appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you all soon at the legislative session up on the Hill. Thank you. Board of Directors, just as you, for your information, Salon C is where our board meeting will be at about 12:15.